Hi, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and is the mic on? Yeah. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight. We'll go ahead and get started. If you don't know me, my name is Ann Wolf, and I'm the Andrea and John C. Dean family Chief Curator and Associate Director here at the museum. And I'd like to welcome you all as we celebrate and continue to celebrate the exhibition Sagebrush and Solitude, Maynard Dixon in Nevada, with a double header of Don Hagerty, 2 days in a row. So we're very excited. I'd like to start by thanking all of our exhibition sponsors. You've seen their names up here on the screen. I know some of you are here tonight. An exhibition of this scope just doesn't happen without our sponsors, so we're very grateful to all of them. And then I know there's a lot of collectors with us as well who've loaned artworks and books and illustrations to the exhibition upstairs. So thank you for sharing those with all of us and our community. Let's see. I hope you've all had a chance to see this book. It's a little hard to miss, but we published this with our longtime partner, Rizzoli Electa out of New York, who jumped at the chance to publish a book on Maynard Dixon, and I understand it's been selling very well, so you can still get your copy at our shop tonight. The book includes, of course, a primary biographical essay by Don, but also additional essays by Dr. John Ott of James Madison University in Virginia, who's written on the Boulder Dam suite of paintings, and Dr. Ann Kenniston of UNR in the English department. She specializes in poetry, who's written on Dixon's poetry, and both of them will be giving programs in the upcoming weeks. And then I just wanted to mention also we have Griff Durham here with us tonight. He'll be giving an art bite on the 1901 trip with Dixon and Barrene. He knows every single turn Dixon took between here and Oregon. So you're going to want to come to that one. And Carolyn Dufresne is going to dive into the 1927 trip up to Humboldt County. So check your calendars and your programs and you'll get those details. So let's just move things along. Had a chance to spend a lot of time with Don over the last couple of days, and what an amazing exhibition that he's helped to put together upstairs. We're just very grateful, but it's really my pleasure to introduce him tonight. As many of you know, Donald Hagerty is the author of multiple books, including Desert Dreams, The Art and Life of Maynard Dixon, The Life of Maynard Dixon, and The Art of Maynard Dixon. So I think you've got it all covered. Art, life, and everything in between. Additional publications include Beyond the Visible Terrain, The Art of Ed Mell, Holding Ground, The Art of Gary Ernest Smith, Canyon de Chelly, 100 Years of Painting and Photography, and Leading the West, 100 Contemporary Painters and Sculptors. In addition, he has written numerous articles for Western Art Collector, the Magazine of Western History, and American Art Collector, among others. He has also organized exhibitions on Maynard Dixon at the Museum of Fine Arts Santa Fe, the Tucson Museum of Art, the Pasadena Museum of California Art, and he's given lectures at many universities, museums, libraries, and galleries. His talk will be about 50 minutes tonight, and I know he's kindly offered to answer questions following his presentation. So we're all very fortunate that you're here. Come on up, and I'll pass it over to you.
Good evening. Well, as Ann mentioned, this is a second of a double header. The first one I did yesterday was much more serious and scholarly.
I think I forgot the remote control.
Oh, okay. She's going to be my remote control. I have a tendency to talk faster than the remote control can handle. And again, I want to thank Ann Wolf and Pamela Chadwick and all the great people here at the museum. This has been a wonderful place. I've done a lot of museum exhibitions, and this one tops the list. This is a great place. And by the way, you can never say no to Ann Wolf. From 1912 till 1939, Maynard Dixon maintained his studio at 728 Montgomery Street in San Francisco. In this storied Gold Rush building, he created striking paintings and hosted an endless parade of painters, artists, writers, and others drawn to his restless intellect and glowing artwork, is where he developed his distinctive painting style, infused by modernist concepts anchored by his frequent trips to arid lands, particularly Nevada. His studio became a refuge where he could escape from the pressures of his work and his family life and the onslaught of an urban America. Monkey Street, also known as Montgomery Street. On an early Sunday morning, let's go for a walk down Montgomery Street, perhaps trailed by drifting fog. You will soon come to the 700 block of Montgomery Street. This block, once a vibrant, colorful center of San Francisco's bohemian culture life, is today overwhelmed by expensive antique shops, law firms, aluminum and glass, concrete, high-rise buildings, including the Transamerica building. The Montgomery block was anchored by a 4-story building completed in 1858, then the tallest building west of the Mississippi River. The first image was 1862, circa. The second image, approximately 1920. And by the way, the 1921 image is where the present site of the Transamerica building is. Often termed the Barbary Coast, the area teemed with brothels, dance halls, and saloons that accompanied the gold rush. Over the years, it hosted an assortment of actors, writers, artists, including Mark Twain, Bret Hart, Ambrose Bierce, Robert Louis Stevenson, Jack London, George Sterling, and Emma Goldman. Seedy and down at the heels during the Great Depression, it served as a low-rent refuge for as many as 75 artists and writers who could rent a room there for as little as $5 a week. The area became affectionately known as the Monkey Block by local residents. Stop at one address, 728 Montgomery Street. Presently, how it looks. Building and several others along the block date back to the early settlement of San Francisco. Erected in 1854 using timber salvaged from derelict ships in San Francisco Bay. It was originally called the Ginsella Building after the owner, Joseph Ginsella, who operated a China and clockware business that he catered to miners. Survived the 1906 earthquake and fire and numerous tenants. During the 1920s and 1930s, a puppet theater was erected in the ground floor. In those days, there was nothing exciting about the ventilation, crumbling plaster, dank stairwell, or ancient plumbing. The structure could be entered through a tall green door, the peeling paint showing archaeological evidence of its past. On the wall, nameplates, some handwritten, but most represented with elaborate care, highly individual designs defined each tenant, each in its own way, reflecting the occupation of the tenant. One of them showed a thunderbird captured in a circle. Maynard Dixon, it read. Dixon's studio was on the top floor of 728 Montgomery Street, 2 long flights up at the rear of the building. A single room, it measured 20 feet long and 20 feet wide with a north-facing skylight overhead. 2 wooden partitions concealed a sink, a hot plate, a small bed. There's Dixon laying on the bed. Walls and floors seemed overpowered with cowboy and Indian artifacts, Navajo textiles, baskets, Pueblo pottery, saddles, lassos, bridles, and feathered Indian headdresses. Hundreds of drawings lay scattered about, encompassing the history of the West. Several of Dixon's sun-drenched, colorful, and boldly designed paintings, including no doubt Nevada paintings, perched on easels, volcanic walls. Over the door, a bleached buffalo skull, mounted in a blue circle, greeted visitors. The air reeked with the smell of paint, turpentine, and the aroma of Indian herb kinnikinnick, which Dixon used in his hand-rolled cigarettes. If you breathe deeply, inhale deeply, you might also catch a whiff of pinyon pine and sagebrush. It was, one visitor remarked, like a place of magic. Harold von Schmidt, later to become a noted Western illustrator, remembered the first time he met Dixon just before World War I. Maynard Dixon is one of the best painters in California at that time, and I heard that he kept open studios at his studio on Saturdays. I finally got up the courage to call on him, went up to the first floor and knocked on the door. Third floor. It had one of those pebbled glass windows that one could see through. With the light coming from behind him as he came to the door, the silhouette got bigger and bigger. I thought, Christ, he must be 8 feet tall. He opened the door, it was only about 5 feet 11, very thin. Maynard Dixon seemed the incarnation of Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind. Slender, almost angular, he had a thin face with deep blue eyes, dark straight hair cascading toward one eye, a rakish mustache, slightly hooked nose, and long, slim, facile hands. As he worked on a painting, he might sing a Navajo chant or a Mexican song, and amazing his visitors roll a cigarette with one hand, usually his left. An all-black tailored suit set off by an orange string tie, revealed when he took off the artist's smock, made him seem taller. A black wide-brimmed Stetson hat and hand-tooled high-heeled Texas cowboy boots accentuated the effect. His step was light and careful. Walks like a deer, someone once said. Each step answered by a faint buzzing from the rattlesnake tail attached to his hatband. Walking on Montgomery Street, he usually clutched a sword cane, which is in the exhibit in one of the cases. The silver handle embedded on the top of the same Thunderbird which appeared on his nameplate. When Dixon finished his work at the studio, dinner time had arrived. Then he would bring out glasses, teacups, a gallon jug or two of red wine, and a bottle of rare and raw California brandy. Other people started arriving in his studio. Dorothea Lange, Dixon's second wife, usually arrived first from her portrait studio a half a block away. 20 years younger than Dixon, a small, bright-eyed woman. She had a smooth face and a leg that had been twisted in childhood by polio. Heavy Navajo silver bracelets encircled her wrists, and her hands smelled faintly of the chemicals used in her darkroom. Perry Dilley, a puppeteer and who ran the puppeteer theater downstairs, might come next. Confined to a wheelchair, he would be carried upstairs to Dixon's studio by friends. Others, writers, artists, poets, book dealers from nearby rooms or studios arrived singly or in small groups. Dixon called his favorite Chinese restaurant and ordered food. Everyone shared the bill, but not the choices. Talk jumped from subject to subject, art, politics, neighborhood gossip. As the wine and brandy sank lower in the bottle, the conversation became clamorous, then even bawdy. Then the mood turned quiet as Perry Dilley's sad, sweet tenor voice came floating out of the shadows, while Dixon and the others hummed harmonies, brooding folk songs of being alone, of longing, of bottles almost empty. Around the studio, Dixon's paintings gave testament to loneliness and lonely places, expansive, uninterrupted skies, places where few people went. Silence, clarity, and exhilarating landscape seemed to surround the people as if part of the West's earth and space had been gathered onto canvas and scattered around the studio. In the 27 years that Dixon maintained the studio, there was an endless parade of people coming to that studio. I'm going to talk about some of them briefly, and some of them at length. A partial list that I composed from letters, oral histories, newspaper articles, and other sources unveils such luminaries who came to studios such as Robert Enright, George Bellows, Rockwell Kent, Wassily Kandinsky, Friella LaGuardia, mayor of New York, William Saroyan, and John Steinbeck were all visitors. Noted composer Ernest Bloch sometimes stopped by and played excerpts from his recent compositions while Dixon painted. And of course, there was the San Francisco artists, the writers, the poets, and others who constantly wandered in and out of his studio. Ansel Adams, Xavier Martinez, Sergeant Johnson, Lucien LeBeau, Edwin Grabhorn, proprietor of the famed Grabhorn Press, etcher Roy Partridge, and his wife, photographer Imogene Cunningham, Harold von Schmidt, Ralph Stackpole, Ray Strong, Frank Van Sloan, Gatardo Piazzoni, Chiro Obata, George Post, and a young David Park, later to be a famed modernist figurative painter. California were among others that wandered in and out. Edith Hamlin, a young, vivacious painter and muralist, just getting started in San Francisco's art world. This is portrayed by Ansel Adams. Had a studio just down the hall from Dixon's. And Dixon often helped her with her mural work and her studies, and they became quite good friends. After his divorce from Dorothea Lange in 1935, he and Hamlin would marry in 1937. Harold von Schmidt recalled that sometimes in the late fall during the early 1920s, Dixon will go down to the train station to pick up the famed, legendary Western painter Charles M. Russell and take him to the studio. His portrait is by Dorothea Lange as well. Russell, in the last several years before his death in 1926, fled Montana's cold winters to his home in Pasadena. He and Dixon would spend all day and night talking about the West and all things Western. Go from one Western to another, and then an all-night coffee house, then back to the studio for more talking. Finally, Dixon would put Russell on the morning train to Los Angeles. In 1930, Dixon desperately tried to get the commission for a mural destined for the San Francisco Stock Exchange. He felt this would be one of his most important murals of his life. But the commission was awarded to the Mexican muralist Diego Rivera, outraging the artist community and particularly Dixon. Dixon convened several meetings of artists in his studio to rally against Rivera getting the commission, but to no avail. Dixon told the press the stock exchange should look the world over without finding a man more inappropriate for the part than Diego Rivera. Rivera is a professional communist, he said, and a publicity prankster, and someone, I believe, he says, he is the greatest artist in the world, but we would do well to have a local artist as example of their work here. Diego Rivera is not the man for the stock exchange building. Dixon probably never had any chance at all for the mural for reasons that he thought would disqualify Rivera. His consistent and vocal aversion to the business community and alienated him from the city's big money boys. Hostile reaction was diffused when Rivera and his wife Frida Kahlo arrived in San Francisco in late 1930 to work on the Stock Exchange building and another mural that Rivera also got at the San Francisco Artists Institute. Diego's warm presence, personality looming behind a ever-present cigar, and the diminutive Frida Kahlo's persona dressed in floor-length Mexican Indian dresses, exotic jewelry, captivated San Francisco. One writer termed her the Queen of Montgomery Street. And this is a photo of Frida Kahlo just outside Dixon's studio, photographed by Imogene Cunningham. The sculptor Ralph Stackpole, an old friend and fellow classmate of Rivera, let Diego Rivera and Kahlo use his studio at 716 Montgomery Street, next door to Dixon's, and they lived and worked there for 6 months. Dixon, Lange, Rivera, and Kahlo talked art, politics, and the bleak times defined by what they had seen out in the streets. Their discussions were infused by their shared working class sympathies. Dixon and Rivera sometimes exchanged drawings. Frida Kahlo was taken to Chinatown several times by Lange. The city fettered and honored Rivera and Kahlo, and Dixon finally warmed up to Rivera himself. Anita Baldwin. Dixon had first met Baldwin, the daughter of E.J. Lucky Baldwin, who made his fortune in the Comstock Lode in 1870, when she visited him in San Francisco in 1913 and purchased several paintings and drawings, at the same time arranging a major mural commission for her home in Arcadia, California. For years afterwards, she acquired numbers of Dixon's works, most important works, including this one. It's called Men of the Red Earth, done in 1923. This is now currently at the Audrey Museum in Los Angeles. Dixon called her my angel. Baldwin cast a colorful figure in California history, a businesswoman, philanthropist, poet, author, animal activist, art collector, and real estate developer, including Tlac on the south shore of Lake Tahoe. This story is from Dorothea Lange's oral history done by the Bancroft Library, 1973, and I thought I would include it as a way of showing how influential Anita Baldwin was on Lange and Dixon. In the late summer of 1923, Anita Baldwin arrived in San Francisco for one of her annual trips to visit Dixon and purchase paintings and drawings. Unexpectedly, she invited Dixon and Lange to accompany her on a 2-month trip to Walpi on the Hopi Reservation. Baldwin was interested in Native American music and decided that she wanted to write an Indian opera. Everything would be taken care of, she said, and shortly sent a check for $250 to Lange just to buy a pair of riding boots. But Lange made it last for many more purchases. When they arrived in Los Angeles, Dixon and Lange immediately boarded Baldwin's private railroad car, posed on the siding at Union Station, staffed with 2 cooks, 2 chefs, 2 stewards, and Baldwin's personal bodyguard. Blinds stayed shut on the train ride. When they stopped at the main station, no one could get off. Baldwin traveled all the way with her handbag held close with her pearl-handled revolver tucked into it. When they arrived in Flagstaff, Arizona, 2 men greeted them, drivers who would take them to Walpi, along with dozens of boxes. The entourage followed later that day under pounding rain, encountering washes full of rolling, muddy water. Near Winslow, they came upon one that heavily loaded trucks could not cross. So everyone pitched in, except Baldwin, to unload the trucks and carry them across, and then reload them back on the trucks. Baldwin did not utter a word, and finally one of the drivers said, "Now we got to get the old woman over." They carried her over, making a saddle of sorts with their hands. Lange was stunned when they reached the foot of Walpi with the camp layout, camping equipment including 10 tents shaped like pagodas, and the buses and the boxes of food, including caviar. Lange somehow became a camp cook, learning to prepare meals for a combination of tastes, including her husband. Baldwin, the bodyguard, and the 2 drivers stayed on as camp helpers. The Hopi came down the path to the base after dark every night, chanting and beating drums, but gawking into the camp and forgetting much of the dance. When the tourists came to observe the dances, they visited Baldwin's camp instead. After about 2 weeks, Baldwin lost interest in her Indian opera and departed for Los Angeles, and Lange returned with her. Dixon stayed behind for several weeks. Charles Erskine Scott Wood. I don't know how many of you have heard of this individual, but a rather interesting person, as you will find out. Soldier, poet, writer, satirist. This is a photo of him in his later years by Johann Hagemeyer, San Francisco. For Maynard Dixon, Wood was a living, breathing embodiment of the Old West. Born Charles Erskine Scott Wood in 1852 in Pennsylvania, he graduated in 1874 from West Point, commissioned as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. He was known as the one officer who rejected the fundamental assumptions of American civilization, superiority against the indigenous tribes of the nation. In 1887, he was assigned to the 21st Regiment of the U.S. Army and sent to fight in the Nez Perce War, participating in several brutal skirmishes, including the Battle of Bear Paw, and was promoted to General Otis Olive Howard's staff as aide-de-camp. Wood, who was the one who would write down Chief Joseph's surrender words, "I will fight no more forever." By now, he had come to respect and admire the non-treaty Indians. In the 1975 movie, "I Will Fight No More," actor Sam Elliott does a credible job of portraying Charles Erskine Scott Wood. He resigned his commission a few years later to protest the U.S. government's treatment of indigenous peoples. He attended Columbia University, and by 1883 he had collected a PhD and a law degree. Wood spent several years in Portland as an attorney trying to protect the rights of Native Americans. Meanwhile, he wrote poetry and prose and took up landscape painting. His books, Poet in the Desert and Poems from the Range, became literary successes, as well as his masterpiece, still in print, Heavenly Discourse, a satirical discussion with God. He died in Los Gatos, California on January 22nd, 1944, the age of 91. At that time, the oldest living graduate of West Point. He would frequently come to Dixon's studio to discuss poetry and painting, sometimes accompanied by his wife, the poet and suffragist Sarah Bard Field. They would spend long afternoons and evenings discussing poetry and all things literary. Like Dixon, Wood became drawn to the deserts of the Great Basin, particularly the southern desert of Oregon, and would frequently travel there to paint, sometimes accompanied by his good friend, the noted painter Childe Hassam. Here's a poem from one of his books, Poems from the Range, published in 1929, very possibly composed at the studio. Sagebrush, bitter-smelling sagebrush, bitter and spicy sweet, desert weed to desert fire. Flame tongues will twist the hire and satisfy the horse's fear fast. Pound and crush the desert dust, tales of women, bitter and spicy sweet, oaths, cigarettes, then fall a sleepy hush. Presently a watchful old sagecock croaks, and from the stars the night's jarred cries like a plummet. The black rimrock flowers like a castle, burning on the sky. One by one the cattle have lain down, but a wakeful cow grumbles deep and low, age-old jungle sound of age-old woe. The alkali lake is mirror thickly starred, the cow cump restless sleeps. Tinkle of spurs, the night guard, all is still. Out in the dark, unhappy, pain, and shrill coyotes bark. In the last several years of his life, Dixon wrote a number of short stories, usually 1 or 2 pages, of episodes in his life he thought worth recording. A number of them dealt with the studio, and this is one of them. Sometime in 1922, Dixon and Hagerty, the president of the San Francisco Bohemian Club and a noted sculptor, were talking in Dixon's studio about business. Dixon had become a member in 1903. Suddenly, Parley Lewis burst through the door. Now, Parley Lewis was a Pima Indian from Arizona who had come to San Francisco in 1915 to work on the Panama Pacific International Exposition. Afterwards, he worked at a variety of jobs, including being a model for Dixon and other artists. Parley had recently lost his job as a motorman for the city streetcar system and had started drinking on an heroic scale. Highly agitated, running around the studio, declaring that he was robbed by Bohemian Club artists and that he needed to take out revenge. As he darted around the studio, he spotted Dixon's Colt 6-shooter laying on a table. Dixon always kept the pistol in plain sight, and it was always loaded. Parley darted over, picked up the 6-shooter, started waving it around, declaring that he was going to kill off all those damn artists, particularly Bohemian Club artists. He stuck the gun in Batavian's stomach and declared, "Might as well start with you." Now thoroughly alarmed, Dixon Patagian tried to wrestle the pistol away from him, finally grabbing his arm and thrusting it upward, but not before Parley Lewis got off 2 shots into the ceiling. Parley darted out and was never seen in Bohemia again. For years afterward, Dixon proudly showed visitors the 2 holes in the ceiling. Everett Roos. In late October 1933, Dixon answered a knock at his door at the Montgomery Street studio. There stood a young man with a broad smile who introduced himself as Everett Roos, a portrait by Dorothea Lange. Only 19 years old, Roos had spent the past 3 years wandering about through the Sierra Nevada, along the California coast, and into the desert Southwest, a young mystic seeking inspiration from lonely places. Dixon decided he wanted to meet Dixon after seeing some of his Southwest paintings. Impressed, the older mystic decided to take the young boy home to meet Lange. She too recognized Bruce's talent and ambition and energy, thought he deserved her time and attention. Perhaps she also felt he could use some motherly support. That night she asked him to go with her and Dixon to attend a lecture by artist Rockwell Kent in Berkeley. Through the next several weeks, Dixon and Lange took him to artist gatherings and social events. They gave him cooked meals after discovering he had been living on raw carrots and banana sandwiches for weeks. For the next several months, Roos wandered in and out of the Dixon studio, observing Dixon working at his work, or accompanied Lange to a symphony. Sometimes he would go out and visit other artists. He would exchange photographic prints with Edward Weston and Ansel Adams. Roos had become somewhat proficient in woodblock printing. He asked Dixon for advice, and in a letter to his mother he wrote, "The other day I had perhaps the best art lesson I ever had, a lesson in simplicity from Maynard Dixon. That time I really did learn something. I think I've been trying to apply what I've learned. The main thing was to make what I was doing more simple." Dixon told me what was meaningless in a picture and have the strength to eliminate it and see what is significant and how to stress it. In this, she showed me with a little scrap of black and white paper and placed it over my drawings. Roos remained in San Francisco for several months, exploring the city and the dramatic Northwest coast, meeting other artists, trading prints with them, as I said. In early March 1934, he finally left for Los Angeles. Dixon and Lange never saw him again. In March 1935, Dixon received a disturbing letter from Everett's mother. Roos had decided to explore southern Utah's Escalante River region in November 1934, informing his parents he would be gone for 2 months. After 3 months, they discovered he had not called for his mail at the small town of Escalante. Alarmed, they alerted authorities, who formed a search party, but found only his 2 starving burros, in a makeshift corral in Davis Gulch, a tributary of the Escalante River. In a letter to Roos's mother, Dixon wrote, "This is distressing news, but wanderers like Everett Roos have disappearing habits, and he may yet show up." But he never did. Dixon might have had Everett Roos in mind when he wrote his poem, At Last, in May 1934. This poem is probably Dixon's most quoted poem, often used as his epitaph, to serve as Dixon's epitaph. I used it a few times myself until I discovered something else. I think it was meant for Everett Roos. At last, I shall give myself to the desert again, that I and its golden dust may be blown from a barren peak, broadcast over the highlands, sunlands. If you desire some news of me, go and ask the little horned toad, whose home is in the dust, or seek it among the fragrant sage, or question the mountain juniper, and by their silence will truly inform you. Sayings from the studio. Maynard Dixon was a marvelous writer. One of the things he would do after a long day at the studio and after dinner, as a way of relaxing, he would read the dictionary. When Dixon took a break from painting, he often worked at his poetry, scribbled letters to friends or to art critics he believed misunderstood his work. He wrote what was on his mind at that time, ranging from deeply thought out essays to quick musings about modern art, something going on in his life, and other subjects. He often tacked them to the studio wall. I managed to track out as many as I could, and here are some of them. Remarks from the studio. There's some really interesting ones there. And there's a profound one. What's the difference between a scene and a landscape? How do you get horses to pose for you? And it goes on and on. You should read, it's really a sort of funny thing. How do you get the model to pose nude for you? Oh, I don't have a body like that. And it goes on and on. I think this is, yeah, the first one. Yeah, you're back. Yeah, I'm sorry. There we go. Where do you get the narration? How do you get the horses to pose for you? How do you see anything in this cubic art? There's actually 2 pages. I only brought one, or put one into the PowerPoint. But these are the sort of things that Dixon would do. And these were sayings that he gathered from visitors to his Montgomery Street studio. Next one. My idea of God. Dixon was conflicted. He struggled with the idea of God and wrote this rather long and lengthy letter. I only put the first page up. And he would put down his thoughts about God. Did he exist? What could be done to elaborate on the role of God? And he finally came to the conclusion, no conclusion. He could not resolve that there was a God or there was not a God. And it's a rather insightful letter and deeply personal, and the sort of things that he would write in the silence of his studio. Next slide, please. Wisdom from Dry Gulch. Dixon gave himself a pen name, Dry Gulch. And these are some of the things that he would write down, and sort of a mockery, if you will, of the West and of art and people and art critics and so forth. And I'll let you read them there for a few seconds. He did dozens of these. Modern art. Modern art. Dixon struggled with the idea of modern art. He was conflicted with the idea of a vanishing Old West, but yet intrigued with the impact of modern art tenets on his heart and art in general in America. These are just some of the statements he would try to write down to make sense of what he was struggling with at that time. Next slide, please. Imitation. He was strongly against any form of imitation. He felt that artists had to develop their own style and not imitate other artists or other movements per se. And again, insightful in terms of his own vision, and in fact, at the very end, your own vision was his own mantra. Next, abstract art. He felt that all art was abstract in a sense. You read it. It is abstract only as long as it remains unstated in the mind of its inventor. Now, how many of you know that Maynard Dixon was responsible for the color of the Golden Gate Bridge? Yes, he was. This is a letter to Joseph Strauss, chief engineer of the Golden Gate Bridge. When the bridge was being formed and being built, Dixon convened a number of meetings in his studio between the engineers, bridge engineers, and fellow artists and to discuss what color the bridge should be. And he is the one who suggested that sort of rust orange, so distinctive that the Golden Gate Bridge has. And this is the original letter he wrote to Joseph Strauss saying that this is what it should be. I'll let you read it for a few seconds there. Notice the last sentence or two, the reference to God. Still struggling with that. Turning out the lights. In 1939, Dixon reluctantly concluded that he had to leave San Francisco. He was plagued with increasingly difficult health problems. His lifelong asthma, which he had picked up as a young boy in the southern San Joaquin Plains, had transformed into emphysema. And he felt that he had to leave San Francisco's cold, moist climate and move elsewhere. His first choice was Carson City, which he loved, I think, before more than any other place. He never said it overtly in any letter, any communication that I ever saw, but it was always present, I think, underlying Carson City was special to him. His first choice was Carson City. So in the spring of 1939, he and Hamlin traveled to Carson City, staying several weeks to determine whether it would be a place he could live with his affliction. But he concluded he could not. Nevada's cold winters would not be conducive to his health. Their second choice was Tucson, Arizona, and they moved there in 1940. Before they decided to move, they had a studio sale of Dixon's paintings and drawings. A lifetime collection spanning many, many decades. Dixon drew up a price list, and this is what the pricing looked like. 50 cents for a drawing. A small 10 by 14 painting, perhaps $10, maybe less. A 16 by 20 painting, anywhere between $25 and $50. Some of his larger ones might go for $100 at the most. They advertised the sale and became overwhelmed with the response. I wish I could be a time traveler, but when we get back to that. People will come at all hours, they said, even students. Made enough from the sale to purchase a new Ford station wagon. One of the people I interviewed for the first book was a very young man working at Holmes Bookstore, the famous Holmes Bookstore in Oakland, California. And Dixon would often come in there and purchase books for his library. And they became friends of sorts. When this young man heard that Dixon was having a studio sale, he decided to go over and purchase some drawings, all that he could afford, he's told me. And so one day he went over and he was walking down Montgomery Street and he saw sort of a commotion on the street and people kind of running back and forth. Didn't think much of it. He went up to the third floor, walked in the hallway and found that Maynard Dixon and his brother Harry St. John had fashioned a giant catapult out of automobile inner tubes and were flinging water-filled balloons out the third floor window onto Montgomery Street. Dixon could be a really interesting person at times. Afterward, a succession of tenants and owners occupied the building for several years in the 1940s, including being a garment factory for a brief period. This is a photograph by Dorothea Lange in 1943. She did for her two sons. It was finally purchased by the infamous attorney Melvin Belli, who, in 1953, who converted the structure into offices for his lawyers, which one described as working in an upscale bordello. After Belli's death, the building was purchased once again and used as office and space for antique stores and other businesses. The building was vacated after it was severely damaged by the Loma Prieta earthquake in October 1989. Afterwards, the building remained vacant for over 25 years. The structure was eventually gutted and rebuilt as an upscale apartment. Most of the apartments go between $6,000, $5,000, $7,000 a month. Long ways from the $5 during the Depression. Only the original brick facade remains of this storied building. But once, it was a place of magic. Thank you very much. Any questions?
We're going to just ask, we're going to record all the questions. So if you have a question, Caitlin and Bonnie is going to be on the other side with a microphone. Please wait for a microphone so we can capture your question for the recording.
Okay. Fire away.
Where did he live in San Francisco?
He lived up in a small house up on Russian Hill. Yes.
How much were his children present in his life in San Francisco? And if I can put two questions into that. And then what were his financial resources, throughout his life and at the end of his life?
Okay.
Thanks.
I knew Dan and John Dixon. Dan was born in 1925, and John was born in 1928. And the answer to your first part is the family life. Dixon loved his family, but he was erratic. He would be gone for such long periods of time. He was sort of a remote individual in a way, and basically his two sons never really knew him. That's what I got from them. They struggled. When I first started doing the book and I was interviewing them and talking to them, I could see the strain in their voices. And then the other question was the financial resources. Dixon made a pretty decent living, actually. During the Depression, he did a lot of mural work for post offices and libraries and so forth, and made a very good living from that. So he got by. It was, an artist's life was just never fantastic until you make it like Andy Warhol or something. I hope I answered that for you.
Hi, do any of his mural works still exist?
Yes, quite a few. You can travel.
Is there a book on them or something?
They're in my book, books. If you travel down to Sacramento, go to the Library and Courts building. It's just directly across from the state capitol. You will find two murals there. On the second floor, you will find the murals from Anita Baldwin's home in Arcadia, 4 panels of Plains Indian life. And on the top floor, you will find the Pageants of Tradition, which is Dixon's greatest mural, some 40 by 70 feet on the south wall of the building, or the Gillis Room is what it's called. So that's the closest one. You go to the post office in Martinez, California, there's one there. You go to the post office in Canoga Park, any of you from Southern California, you'll find one there. Go to the Biltmore Hotel in Phoenix, and you will find one there. Yeah, they're around. A number of them have been destroyed over time. There was a great one. The one that you can really get a very fantastic mural is the one at the Mark Hopkins Hotel in downtown San Francisco. The Room of the Dons. Go see that one. So anytime you're in San Francisco, make a pilgrimage to that one. Others were destroyed. There was a great one at the Oakland Technical High School that is gone, although I've heard rumors for years that it was actually rescued, but I don't think so. He was acclaimed one of the great American muralists of his time, a noted muralist, and it was something I always thought about doing, was doing a book on his murals. I even had the title, History on Walls. Any other questions I can help you with? Glad to talk to you individually if you like. Okay.
That was tremendous.
Was it? Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I work here at the museum in the education department, and it's a real treat to take students into the Maynard Dixon exhibition.
Oh, thank you.
They really-
What's your name?
Bonnie.
Bonnie? Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your talk.